Thank you very much, John. And actually, yesterday when we were having the well-known 4 seasons in one day in Melbourne, someone said, Gil, you see, that's why we cannot walk or bike or use the parks in Melbourne because of the weather. And everybody has excuses about the weather. I remember around this time last year, I was in Cuba, and people said, I was working for the government of Canada in Cuba, and people kept telling me, you say, Gil, here it's too warm. We cannot really walk. And then I took the flight back to Canada, and then they said, oh, here's too cold. We always have excuses, so it's nice to listen to what the children have to say. And one of the things, I was invited to Chihuahua to an urban forum, and I said, I want to talk to the children, and let's ask the children, how do they vision their city? How do they envision their city when they have their age of their parents and they have children their age? And look, people like Anna, half of her city, half of her community are parks. And then look at Edgar. Edgar is only 13, but at 13 he knows. For example, he said he wants fewer cars, and he said he wants more people walking and more people cycling. And then he had an area for pedestrians, for cyclists, for buses, and for cars. He's only 13, but he knows that if you mix cyclists and pedestrians, the pedestrian gets injured. If you mix cyclists and cars, the cyclist gets injured. So each one needs their own separate space. And then Edgar has public parks. And then low buildings with street-level activity. The other day I was at the University of Toronto talking to the students of the Masters in Urban Planning. And I said, you know, you better study really, really hard, because the children in Mexico, when they are 13-year-old, they can summarize Urban Planning 101 in one drawing. And actually, we gotta think this afternoon is, how do we wanna live? What kind of cities are we going to build? Like Melbourne and Sydney are growing very fast, like many cities in Canada. I mean, in 25 years, Melbourne is gonna have 30% more people. So how do we want to live, you know? At the end of the day, the cities are only a means to a way of life. It's not just about telling people, you know, don't waste a liter of gas to get a liter of milk. If the closest place to get a liter of milk is 3 or 4 kilometers away. So what kind of cities? How do we want to live? As we grow the new cities, we really got to make sure that we have parks within walking distance of every home. And the reality is that in the last 40 or 60 years, we've been building cities around the world thinking much more on cars mobility than on children's happiness. And those two concepts are incompatible, because when we define their cities around cars, all we really get is more cars. And then we gotta go out and invite our friends to help us cross the street. The roads are getting wider, the cars are going faster, we are living longer, so we have older population. But when we define their cities around people, then we get more people, but we also get healthier and happier people. And also we get healthier communities and better quality of life. And actually, when I say quality of life, someone the other day said, Gil, don't even talk about quality of life. We're going through an economic crisis. Well, the reality is that we live in an ever more globalized world. And in a more globalized world, the best people, they can live anywhere they want to. The best carpenters, the best medical doctors, the best engineers. So why would they want to live in Melbourne and not in Sydney or in Vancouver or in Copenhagen or in Paris or somewhere else? So the reality is that quality of life today is the most important tool of economic competitiveness. That's why parks are relevant. That's why parks are so important, because good communities is not so much a matter of engineering. It has so much more to do is with people. So I'm very, very happy to be here. I'm thankful to the organizers of this Congress. I think it's fantastic to make the link of public health and parks, because the reality is that public health in most countries around the world are becoming the best partners to get things done, to create cities in a different way, in a more healthy and more sustainable way. And this is about building broad alliances, and I think this is what this Congress is about. By the way, we used to be called Walk and Bike for Life. But people thought that we were just focusing, and now we moved into 880 cities, because when we were talking about, we're called Walk and Bike for Life, people thought we were just about walking or cycling, so we were kind of put in a box. The reality is that we see walking and cycling as a means, not as an end. What we're really interested in, how we're going to create vibrant cities with healthy communities where people live happier, enjoying public places. So that's why we moved into 880 cities as livable community advisors. But sometimes we feel that we're facing a perfect storm because we see obesity crisis and global warming and traffic congestion and economic crisis. But at the end of the day, the perfect storms help because they can be the perfect opportunity. And it's also time to go beyond the baby steps and take some bold initiatives. So I'm going to talk a few minutes on each one of these 6 initiatives. The first one, we got to make a case for parks. Sometimes we go to these events and we talk about amongst parks people and we say, oh, our politicians, they are so dumb, they just don't get it. And we are so smart. No, maybe we are the dumb ones because we have not been able to make the case. It's not for parks. So one of the things with 880 cities, we have come to the acronym that parks improve the earth, the environment, the economic activity, the recreation, transportation, and health. And we got to have the benefits, almost like a list of benefits for each one of these, because maybe one of our counselors is into economic activity, so we got to tell them about those benefits. But another one doesn't care about economic activity, but about the environment, so we got to have the benefits. Let me give you an example of these benefits. For example, from the environment point of view, there is no doubt that walking or cycling has a lot fewer gases. From the point of view of transportation, too many people are driving to the gyms to walk on the treadmills. And, an image is worth 1,000 words. Well, and what happens? People go in here, they go up, they go inside, they pay a monthly fee. What do they do when they go in? They go up and down the stairs. They could have gone up and down for free on the other ones. The reality is that walking is a mode of transportation. Even in the wealthiest places and the more sprawl and wealthier places of Melbourne, at least a third of the people do not drive. Everyone under 17, 30% of the over 60, and so on. And if the place is not as sprawl, if it's more compact and maybe not as wealthy, then more and more people. So walking is a mode of transportation. Now let's go to the health. Is this what the future looks like? In the US, only 25, 30 years ago, none of the states had even 10% obesity crisis. This is not overweight obesity. This is 1990, 95, 2000, 2005. Now some of the states, more than 1 out of every 3 residents are obese. Look, in Australia, just 30 years ago, 1 out of every 14 citizens, adults, were obese. Now it's 1 out of 5. And, I hope that Australia does very, very well in the World Football Cup, in the World Soccer Cup. But I hope that Australia doesn't win the World Cup in obesity. This doesn't make sense with such beautiful parks. So we got to make the connection. And obesity is just not an issue of looks. It's an issue that there's so many problems, so many health problems related with this. And this isn't rocket science. Either we intake fewer calories or we burn more calories. And the parks are on the right side. The intake, taking fewer calories, we see, all of these magic diets that we know they don't work. And actually, with the World Health Organization, there's a lot of work on the second part, how to increase the levels of physical activity. And we know that a couple of 100 years ago, the physical activity was mostly in work, domestic, or transportation, but now it's mostly on recreational. So parks and walkable and bikeable places play a very, very important role. There is a wonderful niche for parks to play a role with. Now let's turn from the economic point of view, from the point of view of economic. Minneapolis has such a fantastic park system, probably one of the best ones in North America. And the other day I was asking some people in Minneapolis, how much money do you make out of your trail system? And they say, oh, Gil, we don't really make any money. I said, how many people come to your trails? And they said, last time we counted, it was about 14 million people went to the trails. But they say, we lose 1.8 million on maintenance because we don't charge, it's free. My God, we gotta become much better in parks on making the case. What happens if each one of those 14 million people get a hot dog and a soft drink, $5? That's $70 million. What happens if the city gets 10% sales tax? Then they get $7 million. So they're actually making, and if 10% of them stayed overnight and the hotels and the repairs and so on. So we have to make the case so that we get the proper funding and so that we become relevant. So the reality, let me move on to quality of life for all. I'm going to talk briefly about Bogota, and not really because I was commissioner of Parks and Recreation, or because afterwards one of my brothers became mayor. Maybe I did a good job, that's why he became mayor. But because Bogota has 1/9 the per capita income of Australia. And I'm not saying that Bogota is on the same league as Melbourne. No, I'm not crazy. I mean, I wish. But the reality is that Bogota was going hopeless, and now it's turned